Hey everyone, welcome to the Creative Leadership Podcast 2021. Do you believe it? Oh my God, I'm so happy 2020 is gone. So let's hope this year is going to be so much better. My name is Arne van Oosterom, and this show is broadcasted to you from Blue Sky Republic. The show is for all the creative doers and thinkers and generalists and navigators and innovators and change makers and outside the box thinkers and misfits and all those folks who sometimes feel lost in the space in between. This podcast is for you. Today I talked to Sarah Cox. Sarah is an expert in design thinking, innovation, program development, and she trains corporate entrepreneurs and innovation leaders. She calls herself a misfit, but I don't know, she actually is always looking to build bridges. And I kind of talked to her about how she grew up, what shaped her, and how she creates safe spaces for the creative teams she works with. And safe spaces, I think that's such a fascinating and important topic for all those creative leaders, servant leaders, all those people who try to make a change and a difference in this world. So enjoy.
If I had to describe myself, I would probably say that I am a bit of a social misfit who fits between lots of different groups and works in lots of different areas and tries to figure out how to bring people together to create something greater than they'd be able to do on their own. I try to match up those shared areas of interest and join the dots so the right people can start working together to create something that is, mutually interesting and of great value, hopefully.
Social misfit is an interesting word. So how do you become a social misfit? Is that where did that happen?
That's an interesting question. I think it's something I've been bouncing around a little bit. I'll admit you helped me out quite a lot recently. Post lockdown, I'd set up a community that we've called the Confab, which means I think the idea is con to be with, and fab to make, to fabricate, but also it can mean kind of confabulate, which I believe means to come up with a lot of nonsense. And one of the, you very, very kindly joined us for a session to explore some kind of different creative ways of working virtually, which was really insightful for us. And one of the ideas we were talking about, how do we categorize this group that we've created? And the one thing that kept coming to my mind was the misfits, because I think a lot of people who get into creative roles, or my role is in what I'd say, design strategy, design thinking, for those who use that terminology. A lot of people within those spaces, I think, find themselves a little bit sort of as misfits. They chart their own path to an extent. They don't necessarily fit neatly within any one box, but also they, I think misfits sometimes like novelty and like to try and explore new areas. And I find myself in that space a lot. I want to be helping people solve problems that are really frustrating them. And I think that's what motivates me. And it probably comes a little bit from, I suppose, my childhood, my upbringing. I've always been someone who didn't necessarily fit neatly within any social group. I never had like a clique or anything. I just kind of floated a lot between lots of different groups, and always expected that, or got used to having friends and collaborators and people close to me who came from all of loads of different backgrounds, loads of different disciplines and interests, loads of different walks of life. And those tend to be the people that I find myself maybe most drawn to when I'm either in a personal or a professional context. The individuals who don't necessarily neatly fit in, but as a result of have this, I suppose, empathy for those individuals who, we all come into a group and we all feel a little bit awkward. And I think any leader or anyone who is trying to build a community needs to have a good view of what makes people feel like they belong, what makes them comfortable, what might be an impediment to them engaging effectively. And I try to pull on that, my own experience of feeling like I don't quite fit in. when I work with others as well.
So I go back to you, because you said it comes from my, probably, it comes from my childhood, or that's kind of where you, if you reflect back on your childhood, that you kind of recognize that kind of, that kind of personality trait of being the misfit and not being able to, or not being connected somehow to kind of groups. And how did you experience that as a child? Was that something you were aware of? Did you feel, because that, in a way that sounds a bit like, that sounds lonely. If I, like, oh, you don't connect to groups. And I relate to that myself, because it's interesting, because I had the same, but I do kind of, when I go back and think about how I sort of didn't really connect, it was also because I was very shy and I always felt insecure. And so, because I really did want to connect, but I somehow, I would describe myself as a misfit, I guess, but I didn't feel like a misfit. I just felt like shy and insecure. So how did you experience that?
I don't know if I would have used the term misfit back then. And maybe it's kind of like reclaiming of a label somewhat.
Sure.
But I think I was conscious of it when I was younger. I think there was a few factors involved. One, maybe just intrinsic personality, in that I am quite shy and possibly a bit more introverted. I'm the type of person who, if I meet someone and I can find something in common with anyone I speak with, but I'm better on sort of a one-to-one basis, because I feel like I can build that connection with someone and figure out what it is that they're interested in, and learn from them. But I think when I was a child, I was an only child. I lived quite far from my school, and I think there were a few kind of, just quite tangible barriers that, I used to play alone a lot and became quite imaginative, and, wrote a lot of stories and things like that. And I think that translated I think it did probably lead to a few, I didn't naturally fit in with my school peers. And I can see maybe I can see with you as well, that, if you felt a bit shy or a little bit on the sidelines when you were younger, when you become older, because it wasn't natural to you to have a group, one, you have to work harder to find them. And that group might not necessarily be the people who are most like you, who you grew up with. But also you have to work on those social skills of connecting and building bridges that I've found quite useful as I've gotten older, because I had to kind of work on it as I've kind of come into adolescence and beyond.
Right. And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the northeast of England. I grew up in Jarrow, which is near Newcastle upon Tyne. Right. And I live back there now. So I've lived a few places around the world and worked in other places within the UK and beyond. But yes, I'm back in my hometown and have been for the last few years.
Right. And what did your parents do when you were growing up?
My mum was a sort of a bank clerk, worked at a bank, and my dad used to be a bus driver but got injured when I was quite young. Oh, really? So he was on what you'd call incapacity benefit, and he sort of took care of me when I was younger. So we had sort of the gender role reversal of the stay-at-home parent.
Ah, right. But are there things like, because often, like for me, I see things, within myself, I some things, some character traits I have that are very, more and more I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to be just like my father, or like, oh, I can hear myself say things and I'm thinking, oh, that's just my dad, or certain things with my mother, actually I think my mother actually went through as a child that. I think when I was in my 30s, I think that's when I started realizing that certain things had an effect on me as well, even though I wasn't my experience. Because my mother had a very bad childhood, but it had an effect on me. So, but also just the characters, and actually both of them are voices in my head in a way. If I think about it, like my mother is more the artist, and she's more about feeling things, and my father's more the scientist, and he's more like, if you can't measure it, it's not true. And and I have both of these voices in my head, and they're always fighting. But I'm leaning more towards my mother's side because I'm more of an artist and a designer and creative. But there's still this my father's kind of skeptical, cynical side there. Yeah, right. Well, So one of the things my father would often say is like, if I would proclaim something, would have an opinion about something, he would say, well, I don't know, let's look that up and see if that's actually true. And I'm like, oh, shut up, it's true.
That's not what this is about.
This is not what this is about. Right? So are there things that you kind of recognize in yourself that you're saying, oh yeah, that's my father?
I think yes, I think so. It's like you said, the curse of becoming a parent, or maybe it's a blessing if you've got very good parents. It asserts itself as you get older. I think my dad had the kind of bigger, inverted commas, personality, so kind of more louder, more outgoing. And so I think I kind of compared myself more to him growing up. But we were both, so yes, in a way, we were both very stubborn, kind of willful people. And he came from, I suppose, an older generation. Grew up in 1940s Glasgow as a kind of an Irish immigrant and had a relatively tough time of it, and wanted to make sure that I was tough as well. So I think I've internalized a lot of those values.
So how does that work? So he wanted you to be tough?
Yeah. So I think,
in what way tough?
Don't let anyone take advantage of you. You've got to stick up for yourself. Right. I think he was worried that I was, all of his family were in Ireland, and was worried that, me being an only child, he was very sort of, sort of morbid from time to time. And he would sit me down for a talk of how I need to take care of my mum when he wasn't around anymore, and these sorts of things. So he wanted me to be self-sufficient effectively. And that was what I was raised to be able to take care of myself, to not need to rely on other people.
And do you know how was I'm just curious about how does that work in practice? How do you teach someone that? And besides, obviously talking about that maybe, or acting that way as a parent, but how do you because maybe that's a really good thing to teach my children.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to teach, but it's interesting because I think that the only thing that children learn, and I think this is the same in the workplace or any groups that we are part of, you don't learn through being told, you learn through experiencing and seeing something acted out. And it's something that I try to do in my work life. I try to model the behaviors of being, not necessarily challenged, but being productively questioned on things that I'm putting forward if I am, the leader of a project, for example. So I don't think that you can teach it through words, but I think that was the way that I mostly was taught. It's an interesting question that I may have to reflect on more. What did I witness of that? But I think I did internalize it quite a bit, but I think that maybe some of the lessons that I internalized weren't the most productive ones. And it's something that I've come to reflect on more as I've grown personally and professionally as well. And realized that, the idea of, my dad was trying to teach me from his best experience and to give me, the best start in life that he believed that I needed from his personal experience. But kind of it's the thing of what gets you so far soon becomes like antiquated and outdated, and it won't help you evolve to the next stage. So it might have helped kind of in my youth when I needed to take care of myself. But as I've progressed, as I have sought out sort of wider horizons, you can't be totally self-reliant. You can't set up a business or create a community or do anything that is more that will have impact beyond yourself if you are holding yourself tight, if you were wanting to be the leader, if you're wanting to see your personal vision realized, if you are looking to be the deciding voice, or to not risk being kind of challenged on anything. I've had to. So I think it's come from my upbringing quite a lot, that there are definitely great things of value, and I'm still incredibly close to my parents, and they've taught me a huge amount. But there's also things that I've had to sort of unlearn, and that has come from my upbringing. But it's also come from, I think, the education system as well. We teach so much the value of being right, of having the right answer, of it's right or it's wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a whole conversation to be had about the devaluing of creative education as well, because it's more difficult to assess, or it's seen as less directly related to employment. But I think that the one thing I quite unknowingly, because I didn't have anyone in my family who went to university, I mentioned I'm quite good at writing. I've always been quite academically adept, quite naturally. I can digest information quickly. I can regurgitate it on a page. I always did well in school.
But you were writing stories as a child,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So it's something that not only that it came easy for you. I mean, it's something you've been doing from a very young age, as as I understood from your story. So that's and me being having dyslexia, that to me was like so jealous of that.
I know.
Being able to kind of just go, boop, I can write it down, and it makes going back a little bit to you growing up, you went through primary school, and where did you go after that?
I went on to secondary school and to what we call sixth form, so kind of education between 16 and 18.
Right.
When I was in the UK, so we do A levels, and I did. I was always very torn between the sciences and the arts,
right?
And I sort of kind of maybe took almost a midpoint. So I ended up focusing on law as one of my A levels, and went on to law school. And I think the reason for that, I didn't know anyone who's a lawyer. I didn't really have anyone to give me guidance on that. It was based on, that's a good job, and people respect lawyers, kind of. There might be a lot of bad jokes about them, but they have some social standing. And it's a lot of reading books or reading statutes and then writing, and I can do that. Right. And that was the route that I went. And I fit within that niche quite well, as I mentioned, because of my education, because it's very much, what you're told is your supervisor's time is incredibly valuable. So you need to get something as perfect as possible before you waste their time with it. If you've drafted this brief, make sure it's perfect as perfect as you can get it before you waste their time effectively. And, so there was a lot of solitary working. There wasn't really much in the way of group working with books. And I was well suited to that. And I could churn out I could churn out kind of assignments and things like that. Not that it wasn't difficult at times, but I actually think I learned from there that I was quite stifled by the black and white learning of that. And I know that the law, the more senior you get, there is a lot of complexity and a lot of nuance. But at that early stage of my career, it was very much like it's right or it's wrong. And I found myself, straining against that a bit. And did a very practical degree that you would be qualified. You did a practical qualification alongside the law degree as well. So you would be ready to start working as a trainee solicitor at the end of it, or a trainee barrister, and realized it was a very practical, sensible choice. And I realized throughout that it was kind of the wrong one. I completed the degree, so I would have it on my CV, but I realized that the thing I really enjoyed was jurisprudence, the theory of the law. What is justice? Why do we make these decisions?
Right.
Or the more knotty questions. And I kind of stumbled into, immediately after I kind of submitted my final dissertation, joined a fast-growing SME, a small to medium-sized business, kind of an entrepreneurial business that a friend was working at. They desperately needed someone because someone had just resigned, and it wasn't a particularly senior role, but I needed work. And I thought I'll do this for a month or two while I figure out my next steps. And kind of caught the entrepreneurship bug a bit. It was kind of like there was no guidance. There was not really many rules. The company was growing quickly. And if you could identify an opportunity, you were given the latitude to explore it.
How did you come across? I mean, because that's to me that's a big leap. Like, oh, and then you joined this fast-growing SME. How did that happen? How did they find you? How did you find them?
It sounds terrible because it's very much not kind of a meritocracy. It was just they had an intern who had left,
Right.
And so basically they had a role for an intern, and I had a
Right.
friend who was working there as a
Yeah, sure.
receptionist.
Hmm.
And she was like, oh, this guy's just like left today, and we're caught short. Could you help? So I got a foot in. I was available. I turned up later that same day. I'd handed in my
Right.
dissertation that morning. It was just being in the right place at the right time.
Exactly.
But obviously, being connected to someone who was in the right place at the right time
Yeah,
was
yeah.
a huge
Of
part of
course.
success. And yeah, just started effectively as an intern and progressed quickly because it was growing quickly. And I basically solved the problem designed myself out of a job within a fortnight by automating what was being done,
All right.
and then just kept doing that effectively, like just finding problems to solve, and they kept me around. And yeah, that kind of gave me more of an entrepreneurship bug. And I did that for probably about a year before, realizing actually I am quite academic. I want to understand this more. I want to kind of pick it apart. I've always I realize I have this kind of drive to be sort of a practitioner academic. So I want to be doing the thing, but then I also want the time to reflect on how it works, what is the best way of doing this, and how can I
Right.
communicate that to others effectively. And that led me to going back into study and research, and went to do a Master's of Science in Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and then continued on to doing a research project in design and business. So that kind of led me back to kind of the more, not necessarily creative space, but at that boundary between creativity and application.
That creativity sort of, is that something that you were aware of, that is sort of the space that you would kind of move into? Was that something you were interested in? Is it something you recognize as creative space? I mean, to me, being a sort of, I mean, for me, if you are kind of a misfit in a way, and you're always kind of like, because it does sound, you kind of, when you go to law school and you're kind of saying, not exactly, it doesn't really fit. I like parts of it, but then I like to kind of introduce other parts into it, and then the academic world might allow you to be a little bit more of a misfit, I guess, because of the, obviously because of the nature, you have to do research. So but how did you see that? Is that something that this creativity, this creative space, was it something you were aware of? Because where does it come from? Because I don't hear in the story you're writing stories. Yes, that was one of the things, but it's not like you come from a creative family, you had a creative environment, and so where did that come all of a sudden come from?
I don't know if it was kind of like if it came from somewhere all of a sudden, or whether it was more of a resurgence. I think that I was always creative when I was younger. I liked, art and music and literature, and I was really good at that. But I was also quite good at, maths and science. I think I was more
Right,
passionate about the arts, but I did not know anyone who did that as a job.
right,
I didn't see any route to that. I can't remember how much of it was external, but I knew, like, I didn't know any artists. I didn't know anyone who was a professional musician. I knew people who maybe, like friends of my dad, who had like a garage band that they'd been working at for 20 years, but then they
right.
went to work at the shipyard.
Yeah.
So like, I don't.
So that was not clear. There was no profession. There wasn't like that. So that's how you can make
Yeah,
a living. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Right.
And
Okay.
I did law because it was the sensible choice. There was a good job at the end of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And and I think that so I did get, so it was kind of coming back to it and almost coming at it the other way, because my research, I came back into the creative space through business, really,
Right.
through entrepreneurship, which is a very, pragmatic, profit focused, money focused, business focused way of, creating something effectively.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that an entrepreneur is creative. They create a new venture, they create new
Sure.
value.
Yeah.
But it was kind of through that, and I've built or re-established my appreciation of creativity over time through coming at it through this business angle and meeting more people who were professional designers, or semi-professional designers and artists and musicians, and that has kind of that has enabled me to come back to, I suppose, to learn from the way they tackle problems. when I kind of came back into academia, I started researching this kind of, design thinking was very much a buzzword. But for example, the design sprints weren't yet kind of commonly done within business yet. They had the Jake Knapp book hadn't been published. These kind of intensive collaborative interventions, workshops, were not commonly done across the business world. And I was kind of at the beginning of that becoming really part of the mainstream, and started to explore it. And most people who come into looking at, if you want to use the term design thinking, there's a lot of debate around it's how the value of design thinking and how effectively it's applied in the business world. But most people who come into that space, they come from a design background, they're creatives, and they're making products or communications, and they learn about service design, and they learn about organizational design, and then they learn about social design and social change. I kind of came the opposite way around. So I was like, where is design being used? Well, it's being used to make sense of social problems. It's transforming businesses. And I went down the steps almost to really understand, not just paying it lip service, like not just going to a design thinking workshop and duplicating it, having a few post-its, getting a bit of energy going and saying, yeah, right, I'm a designer, I'm a creative now. When really all you are is a business consultant wearing a creative's coat. I worked really closely with and tried to develop very rudimentary creative practices myself, because I wanted to learn what was the real difference between strategizing in a workshop and actually sitting down and making the thing. Like, what is the difference? And it is a difference in creativity. There's a difference in way of thinking when you do that. When you are not just focused on, right, we've got this output and we've got this amount of time and we need to get to X, the opportunity to sit and actually to be forced to slow down in making something, I think really does enable you to think differently. You are forced to think differently by doing it. And that is why I think there is a real, that difference of thinking, that depth of understanding something, that need to bring in different perspectives and to discuss things that might not seem of immediate relevance with others is something that I see designers doing a lot, that we don't really, even if we are design thinking experts, as I think maybe my LinkedIn profile says, we often don't find enough space for that. And it's really hard in the business world, making a case for that.
Well, I kind of relate to your, you have to sometimes slow down and really think about it. And you don't have space and time for that often, right? Because I think that's the biggest challenge probably, is slowing down the time, because we don't have there's simply no language to explain the value of slowing down, of just, or sometimes even doing nothing. It's that's just not there's never a positive thing, but in research, in psychology, we know, if you look at how your brain functions and how you have to kind of allow your brain to process things, because even if say physically you're not doing anything, your brain is working really hard, and we can call that mind wandering. I think this is the only kind of positive word I know. Otherwise, it's just like being lazy, doing nothing, procrastination. It's like, come on, get some work done, move. But moving, getting on with it, sometimes means don't do something now. Wait, stop. And then I had a interview one of my latest podcast with Becky Wright, and she had this wonderful quote, because she said she calls herself a modern day alchemist, and I said, so you're looking for gold, and she said, yeah, but the interesting thing about gold is that if you go down to the river, you find gold where the water runs slow, not where it's running fast. That's not where you find the gold. And they're like, oh yeah, that's so so profound in a very simple way. Like
metaphor,
yeah, exactly. It's yes, and it's so true, right? But how do you cope with that? Because you see that, and I think I think the misfit that you are is actually, I think I would translate misfit to someone who bridges different worlds together, different languages, different ways of thinking, different perspectives, and at least seeing all these kind of differences, and understanding, the value of bringing them together. Which in a way the word misfit doesn't make sense if you look at it from that way. It's actually you're trying to fit things together that are not fitted. So I would say you're not the misfit. Everything else is.
That is a nice way of putting it, and I do think that I'm not very sure on the misfit tag, because it does have kind of a negative connotation, but
Well, it means that you're being told, you're being, in a way, this is the first time I actually thought about it that way, because I think I'm a misfit. I like being a misfit. I call myself a trespasser often, because I venture into kind of spaces that are not mine. I haven't studied that. You're not a researcher. You're not a whatever. Wherever I go, people are like, they're experts, and I'm not I'm a generalist. I'm not an expert in anything really. But I like many things, as most people actually do if you dig down deep enough. Anyway, but the misfit, it has this. There's something negative about being a misfit, as if you are the one that doesn't fit. But actually, what happens is that you are someone who's also a bit of a generalist, because you can see different worlds and you can bring them together. So you're someone who are I don't know what the right word for that is, but you're bridging. You're creating
translating
bridges.
different groups and different languages, and you're creating a space in which everyone can belong. And I think that's the thing that I try to do,
but it's because
that sense of belonging
background
within a group.
Yeah, exactly. But it is because of your kind of background of these, and this is a pattern that I see with many people in this sort of creative space, is that they often are misfits, or they see themselves as misfits, and they did kind of they've always been looking for connection, but never really be able to connect to specific groups, but always kind of they were kind of in between those spaces. So that's an interesting pattern, but it's just because of your basically carving out your own space, your own direction, by saying you go to law school. I mean, most people who go to law school, they basically take things for granted. I think it's just the way it is. It's like, this is law school. This is what they're being taught. They're going to be a lawyer. But there's a few people who say, well, nah, I'm interested in something else. Well, there's something else. Let's go do that. Take that road. And so you combine something that is maybe even unique. You can make a combination of things. And so if I would teach anyone, like, my son is 8 and my daughter's 14. I try to tell him things like, yes, you go to school. My son is 8, so I can't tell him this yet. But my daughter, so you don't have, you're sure, school wants you to make a decision, wants you to choose a direction. They'll tell you, like, you have to know which school you're going to go next. And he's 14, right? And I try to tell, like, that's just your first choice. Don't worry about it. You're going to have
that's the first outfit you're going to try on. Exactly. And you're going to have to mix and match things to figure out what is the right fit for you. It's kind of like, maybe it's like kind of like bricolage, or knitting together a beautiful quilt. You can put the things together in a certain way, whether it's for you personally in your life or within, a group or on a project you're working on. Yeah. But then you can unpick the stitches and put things differently and fit things together differently. It's figuring out how to, create that sense of belonging for yourself.
Exactly. So it's not misfit.
For others as well. Yeah.
So you're not a misfit. It's actually you are a fitter. You are connecting things.
You're the tailor who's
you're a connector.
Together.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's actually, That's interesting thought, actually. Just like, oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong with that word. So, but how do you then now kind of deal with that? Because the dominant force is sort of telling you you are a misfit, and you don't, they don't allow you the time that you think is needed, the space to kind of sometimes just slow down and really think about what's going on. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that that's something that we all, whether we're in a creative industry or not, if you are trying to, if you see yourself as a leader, or maybe you don't see yourself as a leader, but if you're trying to do something different within your organization or within your community or the space that you're in, you have to, yeah, you do need time to think, and you do need time to recharge as well, and a time to kind of mull over different inspirations and different inputs and figure out how they might fit together, and then share them with others and see what their insights are. And maybe there's a whole bit of cloth, if we're taking the metaphor further, that you didn't know existed that they can bring to bear. And I don't have an easy answer for that. I think the one thing that there are lots of I've gobbled down loads of different leadership and business treatises and try to learn the best way of doing things. And the only way to do it, I've learned, is really kind of putting it into practice. So,
and how do you do that? How do you put that into practice? What does that mean?
I think part of it is being reflective and noticing patterns in yourself. So I notice it's difficult in the moment to make time when you have a million and one things to do, and you have lots of deadlines and lots of people to get back to, and lots of outputs you need to create to justify creative time or research time or time away from the computer to have a walk and to recharge. Right. But if you look back and you reflect, you can know to yourself that you are not productive and not creative and not the colleague or the collaborator or the leader you need to be if you are constantly working at like 100% productivity. Because productivity and a focus on that above all else can be the enemy to doing anything truly new or creative. Yeah. Because exactly. When you're doing something new, if it's new, the outcome is uncertain. So the language of productivity is not valuable, or the value of productivity is it's a necessary evil. Your boss, or you're going to have to kind of justify your time somehow. But I firstly push for time within my working week in which I can explore. That is one. I try, and as much as possible, to build it into any projects that I'm working on, so it is an explicit part of the project timeline. That takes a degree of trust. So either your work, you have a strong reputation, or you have built trust within your organization that they know that this is needed. So I have kind of business cases where I'll say, right, I know that we've got loads to do, but I'm telling you now, if we don't take the time to consider this up front, we are going to run in the wrong direction and end up creating something that doesn't meet our needs, doesn't meet our customers' needs, our users' needs, our community members' needs.
How do you create that space for people? Because that, I think most people will kind of understand. I think most people are smart enough to understand that makes total sense. However, it also makes them very nervous, and because it is not rewarded in the same way that productivity has, and unless I have to. When we were saying this, and I thought about this experience that I had once when I was young. I was working in a bookshop, and a shop that were, it was books, and there were different categories, and I had my section of books that I had to take care of, and I don't know why I had to. This made me think of what your story. You cannot, and that's so I can't go into a shop anymore without noticing this, because if you're in the shop, customers basically, they come in usually all at the same time, and then there's nothing to do. It's done. There's no client, there's no customers in the shop. You have nothing to do, but you have to look busy, because when someone comes in, you can't just hang around or sit somewhere and have a drink of coffee. So I was kind of putting the books in order, straightening out the books or something. And you see this in all the shops, like, straightening the clothes or whatever they do. They're busy. They have nothing to do. They have nothing to do. So, and I had that kind of, when you were saying this, kind of that image came to mind of, because there is this feeling of you have to be active. But even if it's nonsense, being active, being productive, doing something is rewarded, is seen as positive. When you're saying, well, we're not going to move we have to really think about this, and so that kind of makes you really nervous. At least made my boss, because I like drawing, and I got like, he almost fired me one day because he caught me sitting somewhere making drawings. There were no customers in the room, but it doesn't matter. You have to do stuff, do something.
Yeah.
And so
I'm paying for your time, and you need to find something that's valuable.
Find something to do.
Even if it's not valuable, just give me the impression that you're earning your wage.
Yeah, because visually I want to see you work. Right? So that's so ingrained. It's so in our system. It's so part of how we grow up in businesses and what we're being told in school. Look active, and even in schools, this is, I think, a rule.
The appearance of being productive is paramount, and I think that it's a big problem for businesses at the minute. If we look, post COVID-19, post lockdown, businesses who don't trust their staff to use their time effectively, and you see the difference in productivity between those who are maybe being observed via their webcam to check that they are doing the right thing, or they've got kind of spyware on their device.
God. Versus,
people who just, the bosses who just trust you to, like, fill in your timesheet and do the work and meet your requirements and things. And it's tough. I think that it's another thing. It's self-motivated as well. Like, we value as individuals the feeling of being productive because we've been educated to. So you might have a big project to work on, but you put it off because I get a sense of, I've done something if I complete my spreadsheet, and that it has its value. It needs to be done, but you'll do all of the easy things first. Yeah. Because they have a definitive outcome and you'll feel good at the end of it.
Exactly.
That's not always a bad thing. Feeling productive, giving yourself a bit of confidence can be a good.
Of course. But then how did you create that space for people to say, okay, we'll, and how do you do that, without making them very anxious and very nervous, and how do you create that feeling of trust, or that safe space for people?
If I was thinking about it kind of tangibly, so thinking about kind of maybe getting a new project started, you're working with maybe a new team, I would want to obviously get everyone together, maybe not in person. It's not possible for us where I am at the moment, but to get everyone together and to set the sort of, if you have a vision or an outcome for the project, set that. Make sure that everyone is in agreement with it. Kind of set the expectation that you are looking for their input. You're looking for them to, we've all been recruited to do this because we all have our unique skills, but there's lots within this that we don't understand. You're an expert within your area, and I want you to be able to bring your creativity to bear. So what are the things that, you've worked maybe on projects before and you've not had the space or support to do really well in your role, say if it's communications, or if it's graphic design, or whether it's research, whatever it is that individual is kind of a master at, as a practitioner at. Where are there kind of untapped creative drives, and how can you benefit from that within your project?
Right.
But also, how can you set the kind of terms so they're not just going off wildly in one direction? How can you have that North Star of, this is what we are trying to achieve together, and we can't do it as individuals? And are we sufficiently, how can we frame this so that we are all passionate to a degree about the work that we are going to do together? I would want to have that expectation up front, and I would want to keep that goal, that mission, as central to our work. I would want to build space within, whether it's within the working week or whether it's within every key team meeting, for us all to think creatively around the project that we're looking at. So I would be throwing in some inspiration or some provocations in there. I would say, we've been doing this research, or I've discovered this, I've put together this insight into what we're looking at. What are your thoughts? What's coming in from your sector? What's coming in from your colleagues? Are there any interesting conversations or articles or blog posts or, work that you've done that ties to this? What are your thoughts? So you're constantly creating that expectation of you have a positive responsibility to be being creative within this process and to be bringing a unique perspective that none of the rest of us have.
So are people prepared to, I mean, is that because I can imagine that it takes a specific kind of person to be able to kind of feel comfortable in that space that you give them, right? Because it is also, I think a lot of people just want to be told what to do, because if you give them all that ownership, or they might get nervous of like, I need, now she's asking me for an interesting article. I haven't now I have to look for something really profound, and I haven't found, and I'm not, I should read more, and so so it might even come across as more pressure on them when and maybe that's actually good to create some a little bit of an incentive for them to kind of think outside of the sort of box, if you will. But how does that? What's your experience there? Do people kind of like accept that, or is it the pressure that they feel like is a negative thing, or is it something that, are you challenging them, or is it a specific person that that is attracted to that? How does that work?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it's probably something that comes up in, maybe if you want to say, my tailoring practice, bringing these people together.
Right.
I would as well, if I have not worked with someone previously, often in these types of projects, if you're working I work within the innovation space. If you're working within innovation projects, the people who have been assigned to there, they tend to be a bit more creative within their own role. They tend to be active problem solvers. They tend to be adaptable. That's not always the case. So if you're talking about the individual who's maybe, been thrown into this, and they don't see, what are your thoughts on this as an invite to, the mic is mine, you know this, and maybe I would imagine you're this type of individual. Someone asks for your opinion on something, and you're like, oh, well, actually, I have a lot of opinions on that. Even if I'm not an expert, I'm comfortable sharing, and there's different things I can pull together. But as you've mentioned, not everyone is comfortable within that. So I would want to have, if I am ostensibly leading within this process, and as maybe not even the leader, but as the person who takes responsibility for creating a sense of belonging within that group, I would want to have a one-to-one with everyone and get a sense of, what is their level of comfort within this? How, what is their experience in being asked to be a leader in their own right, to put their stamp on something? What is their current environment that they're working in? Because someone could be really kind of have a real creative drive, but if they are in an environment in which they have been, they feel criticized a lot, or they feel that they cannot live up to the expectations of their role, if they are under a lot of pressure, they are not in that expansive sharing mindset, they are in a defensive, withdrawn, it's a threat sensing mindset, and that is something that needs to be taken into account. And I would probably, if I identified that within someone, I would want to do a bit more one-to-one work with them. So I could model and show to them, look, I don't have all the answers here. I'm setting this. Maybe I'm helping to shape the mission that we're tackling, or helping to get momentum around this going. So I might be the one who's saying, right, this is the way we're going, guys. But I'd want everyone to be putting their thumbprint on it. And it might take a bit more one-to-one work, working closely, building that sense of trust, and getting a sense of how comfortable is that person. So, when you're asking them to get involved, you're not saying, right, tell me about the latest thinking within your like your sector or within your skill set on this, because that would be quite threatening to them. It's more, maybe you bring them in more softly. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think, given your experience, that what we're talking about would resonate well with the audience that or that would work functionally? Do you have any experiences of things that you can put forward, that examples from past projects you've been involved in, this might not work, or softening the questions, but I would recommend that anytime, if you are trying to bring people together and create that sense of belonging, start from quite an open, quite a less demanding questioning point, and then you can build up as you get a sense of what those individuals are, and and what their level of comfort with sharing is. And maybe they're really comfortable sharing, and it's more of a matter of coaching them and guiding them in your role within this space is not to be heard. It is to make sure that we are all heard and that the best ideas are being incorporated into what we're working on, and model that within my own behavior so that the people who are less likely to share feel comfortable doing so, and the people who can dominate a bit see the value in making sure that they aren't the ones who are leading to too great a degree.
Yeah. So that's being a facilitator, as a leader, right? Whether you are, whether that's whether there's a kind of a hierarchy going on or not, but it's still it's somehow it's building trust, but it's also a lot about empathy and spending time understanding the individuals that you're kind of bringing together. I find it interesting that, and it might, maybe that's not really something that you experience, but because in the beginning of your story, you talk about, being a misfit and not feeling that you were connected to any groups, and now you're all about a sense of belonging. And I somehow my brain goes like, because you didn't, as a child, you never really felt you belonged anywhere. That actually makes you, because usually those kind of things, being on the outside of something, makes you also very profoundly and acutely aware of how that actually works, because you're the outsider. And then somehow being that sort of on the outside of things you might want to belong to makes you kind of an expert on belonging, because you didn't feel that. And
you have to, it doesn't happen, if it doesn't happen naturally, you have to learn, you have to consciously learn the skills.
Yeah, that's a way better way of saying that, yeah.
There's an interesting truism I often think about that says, like, they say the best players often make terrible coaches.
Yeah.
So if you are naturally good at something, if you've got a natural aptitude, or you're kind of like, for example, in sport, if you have a certain physicality that lends itself to the sport that you play, those types of individuals can not always be the best at teaching others, because it came to them naturally. It's not necessarily they didn't work hard and they didn't have to refine their practice, but
but you can't be them.
Yeah, like, so for example, if they're coaching and they've got a player or a team member who the other example might be someone who is naturally successful as an entrepreneur, just has that kind of self-confidence and that drive and just goes. They might not be the best leader of a bigger team. In fact, we see it a lot. The person who is really driven to grow and really driven to achieve doesn't necessarily have that insight as to say, right, well, I don't get why this individual here just can't do it, because their advice effectively is be more like me or just get it done. Yeah, and if something's stopping someone from contributing or progressing or doing whatever it is that they're tasked with, just say, like, just do it is not really a very good, sorry to Nike, but it's not a very good, motivational piece, because if they could, they would. I believe that most people, they want to be valuable, they want to be included, they don't want to be failing. So
that's very interesting. Connecting that to the Nike. Now I can't hear it anymore. It's like, come on, just do it.
Just do it, man. Just get on with it.
Get on with it. I can't do it. Come on. Oh God. Yeah. Oh, there goes. There goes the brand.
Sorry. I'm sure this is going to be incredibly detrimental to the stock price.
My podcast has a big reach. Yeah. So
I'll keep an eye out. The Times of London, Nike's stock price plummets after the Leadership podcast was published.
Yeah, can you please take that part out of the podcast? It's hurting our business. No, that would be awesome. No, I don't think so.
But I think, it's interesting. So that's my belief, that because I have had to think really consciously about how you create these groups and these spaces and these teams, where everyone can bring themselves to the table and can have an influence on something, that I've had to develop that and had to be really conscious.
Yeah, but also your your upbringing of being self-sufficient, so being sort of this, because self-leadership is a big topic, is a big thing, right? Self-leadership, and you have been brought up to be a taking care of your own business, but you also had kind of this reflective moment of saying, well, that actually can't, but there are parts of that you can bring to the team of having, take care of your own, take the responsibility of what you're supposed to do, so self-leadership is really important. But then always also with mixing that with this sense of belonging, that's a wonderful mix, right? So self-leadership, but also having a sense of belonging with the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that my reflection is that you need that safety net if you're going to ask people to do really risky things. And the further you get in your career, the riskier things are, because if you have a certain role, people expect you to have the answers. People look up to you. You have to be very conscious about bringing other people into conversation. Right. So you aren't by default the leader because your ideas might not be the best.
Right.
But also, that if you want to do something really meaningful, that the risk is high, the risk of failure can be high, and you can't expect your team to be taking risks and thinking creatively and working in a different way if you don't create that sense of belonging and that sense of, right, we're asking you to do something different, but if it doesn't work out, let's assess it between ourselves, let's test it out, let's experiment, let's kind of come up with a prototype and find somewhere safe to test this idea before we roll it out. You can't expect people to be kind of putting their reputations on the line or feeling like their reputation is on the line, even if what they are doing doesn't work.
Yeah. So the safety net.
Yeah. Giving them a safety net, giving them a safe space to play in. So rather than expecting them to figure it all out on their own and roll it out, you want to be involved within the process of experimenting and playing around with whatever it is you're creating and testing it out in low fidelity, low risk ways. So you're not creating that sense of, the risk of failure for the organization, but also the risk of failure for the individual, that they've done all of this and it didn't work. And now they have this crisis of confidence. You shouldn't be setting up an individual for that. And that sense of belonging within a team is a really good antidote for that sense of, particularly at the minute, isolation, self-doubt that can come around from rattling around in our heads too much. We're all behind a screen day to day, but how do we create that sense of belonging virtually if we can't be in physical space with each other and read our body language as well as we used to be able to?
Exactly. But then that part of self-leadership becomes so important, right? So being able to kind of, the feeling of belonging, I think you can, yes, we're so missing sort of these coming together, but at the same time, there's so many companies are out there, global companies who, so there's people out there who have colleagues around the world, and they actually were working this way anyway. So a lot of companies, but big corporates, they've been working remotely before this crisis, and so in a way, it isn't new for everyone, except that now it is all of a sudden for everyone.
It's for everyone, and you're not necessarily. If you like where I am at the moment, we're in like serious, like strong lockdown measures. So you're not necessarily going to the exercise class, or even out to the shops or what have you. That would be an antidote for being at home.
Transition moments. We're missing moments of transition. I was talking to. Actually, there's a topic that comes up quite often nowadays. It's the moment of transition. Like you have a call, and after that call, there's another call, and there's another call, and you're not commuting. You're not going to go down the hallway or have with your colleagues and have coffee or have lunch, in the cafeteria or whatever. It's all just kind of one big stream of like online,
online, offline, but I'll put on Netflix. So that's a reality we have to kind of cope with and learn to kind of create new patterns and new ways of. But still, self leadership is there for a really
interesting topic, and I think it's a huge topic, and it's something we are not teaching people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to bring back to that. So there was utility in, I suppose, the values I was raised with. But the more I moved into kind of, space of wanting to be innovative and wanting to create something, the more of a straitjacket it became. Right. And my learning was that, self-management, the most valuable lesson of self-management I've had to learn is either asking for help or putting out there something that's unfinished, just throwing something together and saying, this is where my thoughts are at. What do you think? Because so much of my upbringing and my education was get it perfect, do it yourself. Right. And that, you can move very quickly in that, but you can't lead if you're in that mindset because you need other people to be coming along with you.
Right.
And, I haven't pulled the trigger on it, but I've got this sort of draft blog that I've been meaning to publish for a while of like why I'm a terrible designer. And I think that you mentioned it was really interesting. You've identified that I went from a sense of maybe of not feeling like I belonged to making that almost the central kind of value and central task that I feel like I should be bringing to my workspaces and my communities, a space in which everyone feels included, not like, in terms of I have an issue with diversity and inclusion because it starts from the assumption that, it's a bit of a narrow kind of focus on, how can we make sure everyone is not included? How can we make sure that everyone is included? Well, really, it should be the assumption that everyone is included and look really consciously at the barriers that prevent that. But that's a whole other conversation we could have.
Yeah.
But
great thought. Are you going to publish? When are you going to publish it?
I think I will. I think you've inspired me through this conversation to pull it together. But I suppose my final thought on that was that, like, I have identified, I think, the areas in which, like, how I was raised and how I've been taught have not been conducive to being a good leader, being innovative, being, working well within the design space, because I've developed this intrinsic value of I should have the answer by myself. I should be able to figure it out by myself. I should be able to, kind of get things moving and not have to be vulnerable and deal with all of that internally and deal with that self-doubt rather than opening up and saying, guys, I'm stuck here. I don't know what I'm doing. Because, you are, if you take that approach, you are limiting yourself from the fantastic insight of your colleagues and your collaborators and people who've had totally different experiences. Yeah. And you're putting so much pressure on yourself to be right that you don't have the flexibility to have fun.
Yeah, but asking for help or, allowing other people to teach you something, it means that you didn't know. And not knowing it makes you extremely vulnerable in a space where we often end up in, where people feel that they have to be the expert and they have to know, and not knowing is sort of, it's just usually not a very positive thing.
Absolutely.
But it does mean, again, if you look at it closely, you don't know, because we're all just human beings. You don't know everything. You can't know everything. Nobody knows everything. We're all just trying. We're all just trying to figure out stuff. And we need, it's such common. So what I find so frustrating is that many of these kind of things are simply common sense. We all know that diversity of thought is so important, and that they're taking different angles, and in research, triangulating or whatever, taking different points of view, that is so important. You cannot do this yourself. It's too, things are, everything, whatever topic or whatever project you're on, even though at first it seems very simple, it turns into something very complex. You can't do everything yourself.
Absolutely.
So asking for help, it's, of course you should be able to, but then why don't we teach people? Why don't we teach people?
Yeah, so much of our education system, I think, is on you as an individual having the answer and you with the exam, like you said, and it excludes so many individuals like yourself who that does not work for.
Exactly.
But it means that we have so much to unlearn when we get into the workplace, and maybe that's why my drive towards creating spaces of belonging has been an antidote to that feeling of I need to have all the answers myself. Because for so long within my personal professional life, I felt that my value came from being smart and having the right answer. And it was really threatening for me to move into these spaces where I was trying to create something bigger than myself. Anything that is innovative, anything that, is bigger than yourself requires you to work with others. You can't do it on your own. And it became, while I had a real drive to connect, I felt really threatened by not having the answer, not be seen having the answer, not having a clear route forward, because I had my background and my education did not prepare me for that. And I feel like I've really dug into the design thinking space almost as kind of like as an attempt at personal transformation, as an attempt to unpick all of those, unuseful and unhelpful learnings from earlier in my life, because you can't create anything big without others, without creating, without handing over some of the ownership, without sharing, without engaging everyone within
It's
that.
a very good thought. It's a very good thought. I know. Sorry, I thought that you just linked design thinking to unlearning, and to me, I think for many people, that is what it actually is all about. It is about unlearning, and that is sometimes painful, because it makes you extremely
It's
vulnerable.
always painful.
Yeah.
Because all of the models that you had that you could rely on that gave you a sense of certainty don't fit anymore, and you're out there.
Exactly.
Being like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, and this is where design thinking often is kind of turned into another fixed model, saying a fixed process, because it makes you feel comfortable, and it's a.
And I don't think it's a bad place to start. I know that, like, when I first teach or when I first engage with design thinking, the different models that are used are really helpful. They're like stabilizers on a bike. Training wheels. They enable you to get a bit further, and you can find your balance, and you can pick your own route. But then you reflect and you realize that, it's not the be all and end all. There are different ways of working, and this is just one way of understanding a very complex process of creativity, but complex process of life. And doing things with others.
But that's a big leap from having the stabilizers, realizing you have stabilizers, but you can also go without them. So I always use this analogy or this narrative of cooking. When you start cooking, you've never cooked before, you need a recipe book. But if you want to be a chef, that's a big leap. There's a journey. You have to teach yourself to experiment and let go and try and basically let go of the recipes. But the recipes are there. So I think it's how my experience is now is that, and we shouldn't be in a hurry. But I feel that a lot of people are stuck with having the trainer wheels, having sort of the recipe book, and thinking that is it. And then often using it and thinking like, and because it doesn't help them with because they're no chef, and and then they're like, that's it, and it's just a process, and they go and they fit it into whatever whatever box they have in their business. I'm not frustrated, but I'm a little bit impatient. That I'm like, no, people, come on! It's not about the process or the. It's not about design thinking. There's something else. There's something more profound, more deep going on that we have to address.
But maybe maybe it's reframing your frustration then, because I think that use the analogy, the cooking book is really important, because then it gives us all a shared base of knowledge that's a touchstone for us to work from.
Exactly.
But then we do need to, if you do want to become a chef, and most of us do, I imagine anyone who's giving spare time to listen to a leadership podcast is very keen on self-development and development for their organization and the people around them.
Yes.
But, you need, so if you are wanting to become a chef, you do need to find those opportunities to take the training wheels off, but you're pedaling maybe on grass, because you are going to fall over and you don't want to hurt yourself too badly. So you don't jump from, making a small meal from a recipe. Maybe then you kind of build up confidence, so then you make it for a lot more people, or you make it for a big group. But then when you kind of go off and go by yourself and try and figure out, right, well, how can I make this fit better into this scenario, for example? You're not going to go and then make your first recipe from scratch for a group of 20. You're going to make it for yourself or your best friend or your roommate or your partner, who are going to be a very kind of kind audience. And so it doesn't work, and you learn from that. And you find those opportunities to keep progressing without having to risk too much of your, have a failure or a bump to your ego.
So safe space.
Yeah, and I encourage anyone to do that. Try and find a space, whether it's within your organization or outside, a group, maybe it's of fellow misfits or people who are kind of looking to develop their skills. Find a group that you can try things out with, and you can take your problems to them. And maybe there isn't, you can say, look, guys, I've been tasked with doing this. I've got to do this big pitch. I've got to do this presentation. I've got to scope this project. Can you help me with it? And then you can play around with being creative because there's no risk of losing. So maybe that's the question to ask of any of the leaders listening. Where is your playground? Where do you recharge and get a chance to try new things before you unleash them on the wider world?
Yeah, good advice. That's good advice. Thank you. I thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been interesting for myself to reflect on some of the things that I've experienced and to hear your experiences as well.
Yeah, it's very nice. I wrote this down, that productivity is the enemy of creating something new, which I kind of liked as well. So no, I recognize a lot in what you're saying, being sort of, the misfits, but that teaches you so much about belonging, and because you have to consciously work on it and think about it, and it is a so what this kind of story kind of at least uncovered for me as well, is that this idea of, if you're the outsider, you have to work harder to become an insider. That is actually a skill. That's amazing. So that's which is so important nowadays. So what you're doing is, creating these kind of these communities and the sense of belonging in your team. It's because you had to work really hard at it, and that's a logical conclusion in a way, but I never thought about it that way. It's such so thank you for sharing that. I want to know more about your article. So
you've inspired me to get out there and publish it. So
go do it. When you publish it, where will you publish it?
Oh, I usually just use Medium and LinkedIn, but I'll make sure you have the link so you can give it a read. And maybe it'll be version 1, and then I'll iterate it again.
Cool. I think people would like to read that. So
definitely.
Thank you very much.
I'll share it with you so you can share it with your audience.
Cool.
It is of value. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great to talk.